Coming up in this week's episode of An In-Depth Look, I take a bite of the ice cream sandwich and load it on all sorts of devices around my house. Find out how easy it is to load Android on your PC, if it's worth it, and I'll point you in the right direction so you can get started yourself in this week's episode of An In-Depth Look. Back at the beginning of 2012, we had a Linux action show where we tried to predict the future of Linux, at least for the next year. And one of my claims was that you would see Android come to the desktop. So I've kind of kept an eye on this topic, and thanks to an awesome open source project called Android x86, this has been moving steadily forward. Now, this week they got my attention when they announced you could download ISO images of ice cream sandwich for your laptop, netbook, and a virtual machine. I thought this sounds like the perfect thing to try out for an in-depth look. So in this episode, I'm going to try it on a few different devices, give you my report and my thoughts, and then at the end of this episode, I'll try to explain why you might want to do this. Now, for the first one here, I'll tell you the device I've had the most success with, and that's my little MSI Wind. It's just a little netbook now that I've had for years. This has sort of been the house slut, really. First I got it, it ran Windows XP. But I formatted that even before Windows XP got a chance to fully boot. I loaded OS X on this thing for a while because it made a great Hackintosh for my wife. This little portable unit was just a monster of a Mac. It was great. Well, not monster in performance, but monster in terms of how well it worked. Then I loaded Jolly Cloud on there. That was fun. I talked about that on the Linux Action Show. But this week, you might have noticed this little USB thumbstick sticking out there. That's where I have Ice Cream Sandwich loaded on this thing, and it runs like a champ. A couple of caveats is at this moment I don't have networking working, but if I wanted to jump here and play with Ice Cream Sandwich, this would certainly do it. If I could get the networking working, I would have a fully functional Android machine. It's mapped with the mouse and keyboard here, so you can actually get by without having a touchscreen. You can just navigate Android using the mouse and keyboard, and everything also has arrow key support and tabs and all that kind of stuff. So, you actually don't get too lost. If you didn't want to use the mouse, you could actually just as easily use the keyboard. The performance is actually really good. This is just a little Atom, like a 1-point-something gigahertz Atom with 2 gigs of RAM. This thing's screaming on this device. It's surprising. Here's the thing. This, I believe, is a newer development, but these ice cream sandwiches, this release candidate, actually has the official Google apps on it. So you can run Android Market, and you can run Google Maps, and you get the Gmail application. That's a really big deal, because in the past, if you downloaded these x86 ports, they wouldn't have any of the Google stuff in them. So you'd kind of be left stranded. And what's also awesome is sleep support works. Better than pretty much any operating system I've ever put on here. It immediately goes to sleep, and it immediately wakes up. That's kind of cool, too. And performance-wise, running off this little flash stick, it's been pretty good. Now, there's a couple other different ways you could get your hands on Ice Cream Sandwich if you want to play with it. Not all of them involve formatting your machine and installing it, because I'll be honest, the hardware support is a bit limited right now. You're almost guaranteed to work if you have an Asus EEE PC, an MSI Wind, or something along those lines. Or there's even a few tablets listed that I'll have in the show notes that you could load it on. Outside of that, your luck will kind of vary. I tried loading it on my HP Envy, the 17-inch monster with an ATI Radeon in there. It works, and in fact, it even does what seems to be near native resolution of my LCD screen. But there's just certain things that aren't quite right about it. So I wouldn't recommend it for high-end gear. So what I would recommend is everybody could download the VirtualBox and try it out on their own machine for totally free. I'll give you a look at that. Now here I've got Ice Cream Sandwich loaded inside a VirtualBox VM, and it's pretty dead simple to do it if you download the link in the show notes I have. It's been pre-modified with Ethernet support, which is killer. That means I get full-fledged networking support right here in my VM, something that a lot of times is missing because, honestly, Android's expecting a Wi-Fi chip or a cellular modem. So looking for your network card, that doesn't really seem to happen. But this dude went ahead and pre-patched it for us, and it's pretty awesome. Now, I'll give you a little tour of it, and I'll give you a warning. This version, the VM version, doesn't have all the Google apps. So I don't get all the toys, but that's okay. You know what I did? You can see it right here on my desktop. I loaded the Amazon App Store. So you can go in the Amazon App Store and get a bunch of this stuff. Now, at the time of this recording, I don't have 3D acceleration working in my VM. So there's certain apps like, oh, I don't know, let's go try Angry Birds. I bet Angry Birds won't work. I'll try Angry Birds Real. I was able to install it from the Amazon Marketplace, but I don't think it'll actually run. Yeah, so there's the error message. 3D apps do that. I've tried that. I've tried it with several different 3D apps, and I even tried it with Netflix. I thought this might be a killer way to get Netflix working under Linux, because this is a really low resources VM, and I would totally fire this up if I could then run Netflix under Linux. But as you can see, it starts up. It even does a screen rotation. You can see the buttons are on the side, but then Netflix fails to load. So that's a bit of a bummer. And then also the mouse is really precarious to navigate in this setup. So I don't know. I would actually probably just say switch to keyboard. Thankfully, it rotates back as long as you've disabled auto rotate. That would be probably one of my #1 tips to try it in a VM is go into your settings and disable the auto rotation functionality. Also, in the VM, under VirtualBox, there's an option about host mouse integration. Turn that off. Otherwise, your mouse won't work from VirtualBox, and that's super frustrating. But those two caveats, you actually have pretty decent performance. Things that don't require 2D acceleration, or I mean 3D acceleration, work great. For example, the Twitter app. Twitter works great under Ice Cream Sandwich, under virtualization. The Evernote application works great under Ice Cream Sandwich. I would love to get games working. I know VirtualBox has some 3D emulation support, so it might be possible, but I would think a certain driver would have to be written for Ice Cream Sandwich, and we're not as likely to have that happen since this is really just kind of a hobby. But with those caveats said, and some of the limitations it has, why would somebody want to use something like this? Well, I have a few thoughts on that. My main motivation for playing with this is because there's just simply not a lot of ways to play with Ice Cream Sandwich right now unless you buy a really new, expensive device. On top of that, I just like playing with different technologies to begin with, and I want to learn new operating systems before everybody else gets a chance to. That way, when people ask me questions and things like that, I've got a leg up. It also would work great for simple app dev testing. I could see how a lot of developers might want to load their app on here. Most apps really don't probably require 3D acceleration. So this would be a great environment to test, try it out in different form factors and different landscapes without having to invest in the hardware before you really get rolling. So I could see some advantages there. I also could see down the road businesses who adopt Android a lot. They might want to be able to write an application that would work on phones, tablets, and things like netbooks. I mean, there's definitely practical uses for Android with a keyboard. You know, you throw Android on here, you're probably very likely at some point or another going to be very thankful you have a keyboard. And a lot of these companies bought a lot of these old netbooks running Windows XP that really are trying to phase Windows XP out of their home and out of their network environment now. So if you could load Android on there, you could write an app once that works on the tablets and works on netbooks and works in VM. That's pretty compelling. I'd say that might be one usage case scenario. But really, I'd say it's just for having fun. At this point, it's really just for having fun. Nothing quite serious can be done yet. You do have a couple of different ways you can load it on your machine. You can do just the live thumbstick like I'm doing, and that works really great. You can also do the virtual image like I've done here, and that works really well. There's also an option to install it to your hard drive. You know what? It's not so bad. It comes up with a standard sort of Linux-based ncurses text installer that prompts you through partitioning a hard drive and then selecting the features you want, and then it decompresses the images to a drive. You pull out this thumbstick and you boot off your hard drive. Not so bad. And really, then you're done. Because then also you can create a virtual SD card and you can start loading apps and saving data to those apps. And if you have a webcam, it'll be able to save the pictures to the SD card. So there's a lot of compelling reasons to actually load it to the disk. I don't know about multi-boot. A lot of people have been asking me that on Twitter. Can you multi-boot it with Ubuntu or Windows 7? I'm not sure about that. But if nothing else, you could at least install it and then use a separate open source bootloader to manage your different operating systems. So that might be an option. Now, over in the show notes, I've got links to the hardware compatibility database. It's a pretty long list, so I'm not going to cover them all in the show, but the link is there if you want to check that out to see if your device is on there. Also, links to the ISO images and a pretty good write-up that was done on the whole Android x86 thing. Now, this has all been fun and compelling, but it's only got my itch just kind of scratched. I feel like I got a hot spot. I got a hot spot for Android right now that I want to scratch on. But But some big things are happening in the world, folks, so we've got to move on, and I want your input. You will decide next week's in-depth look. I will put a poll in the show notes. You have to vote on it kind of soon, probably by next Tuesday, the following Tuesday after this in-depth look, because I start working on these shows early in the week. But here it is. Next week, I can look at the Windows 8 customer preview that they just released today and give you my opinions on Windows 8 and run it through its paces and see what's new, see if I absolutely hate that new Metro interface on it or if it works okay. Or option number 2 is a review of the U-Pad. You know what the U-Pad is? It might look familiar to you. I've got it right here. It is the hardware that the KDE Spark tablet will be based on. Now, this one isn't running the new Plasma Active interface that they're releasing. This one's running Ice Cream Sandwich, the latest version of Ice Cream Sandwich at that. It is a little 7-inch device with an 800 by 480 screen, an A9 1.0 gigahertz processor, 512 megs of RAM, and this has an unlocked bootloader. I can flash it with any operating system I want. This will be the basis for the KDE Spark tablet. I got my hands on it early, and I give you my review of this little sucker. Not so much from a Plasma Active standpoint, but from a hardware build quality standpoint, Ice Cream Sandwich running on this device, those kinds of things. So that's option number 2, is the review of the U-Pad, the soon-to-be KDE Spark tablet, or a look at Windows 8. Whichever one you guys vote for the most will be the one I cover next week, but like I said, you gotta vote soon. When you see this episode, vote, vote, vote! Because I gotta make a jump at some point. I can't wait till next week to unveil the results, so you'll just have to tune in and see what topic we cover. Now, if you've got any questions for me about Android running on x86, I'm by no means an expert, but I've been playing with it now for a couple of days, and I'd be happy to answer those questions. You could email me, chris@jupiterbroadcasting.com. That's also a great place to send topic suggestions, or you can follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/chrislas, or why not just find links to all of my social profiles over at bit.ly/Chris Fisher. I'm always trolling those areas, looking for new ideas and new topics, and that's where I came up with Android on x86. In closing, I'll say this. It's early days for this project, but what these Android x86 guys are doing is awesome. I don't know if this will ever be a full-fledged desktop. I'll tell you, though, after using it on my MSI Win, it's pretty compelling. It actually is pretty compelling on a device this form factor. It would make it the perfect device if I could touch the screen. Actually, just before I started the show, I accidentally tried to touch the screen the first time ever to unlock it. You know, Android has the slide to unlock screen right here. I don't know if it's coming up, but I have it in landscape mode right now. But no, I don't. It doesn't. You guys can't see it. But anyways, the first time in my life ever playing with anything like this, I actually tried to touch the screen to unlock it. So it does sort of, you really can't escape the fact that this is a touch-optimized operating system, and I commend the Android x86 guys for making the mouse and keyboard work so well with this, and also all of the other general hardware support that they've baked into this release. And the fact that it has the Google apps on there, I don't know if any of you guys have ever played with Android ROMs or alternative Android distributions before, but the fact that it has the Google apps on there is, well, it really makes it. I mean, it turns it from a toy into actually something I think I could use on a daily basis if I had Wi-Fi support. It's a pretty huge leap. Definitely check it out. I mean, why not? It's free, and if nothing else, you can run it in a VM. And like I said, links to all that stuff in the show notes. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of An In-Depth Look, and I'll see you right back here next Saturday.